In 1989, for the first time in Japan's history, a woman sues her boss for sexual harassment. I am Naka, this is Japatonic, and today we will discuss the various forms of harassment present in Japan. And it was when that trial came to light that the word harassment began to be used. That's exactly where the phrase sekuhara was born, which come from sexual harassment. It's all a matter of simplifying the language, because the Japanese have a hard time saying sexual harassment, so it became sekuhara. Until the 90s, it was something extremely common. Women being sexually harassed was something extremely normalized. To the point that I even remember in an interview with a former model from the 80s or maybe the 70s when she was young and not yet famous. She said that in her time, it was extremely common for her to be hired to serve coffee in a bikini in offices. I mean, and it was something so common, to the point that the office employees didn't harass her too much, because it was a very typical contracted service. I had never heard of it before. I'm not sure how common it is, but at least for her, who just beginning her modeling career, for her, it was a common and everyday occurrence. Nowadays, obviously, it's unthinkable. But let's see. To what extent do we realize the issue of the sexualization of women and the normalization of seeing women as an object? Therefore, in those times, harassment was a common occurrence in everyday life. Nowadays, obviously, it's not the same. But what happens if there is harassment? The phrase sekuhara is heard a lot today and is often discussed in work environments. The issue of the hara from harassment are usually terms of harassment within work environments. And the saddest part is that if the woman wants to do something about it, instead of speaking out, she chooses to quit her job. The Japanese don't like to expose their personal problems within the work environment. If TJ speak up, they would find themselves in a very uncomfortable environment. And perhaps if the woman is brave enough to accuse a colleague or something like that, in some cases, she could receive support and get people to listen to her. But in most cases, even though the boss's fault or the harasser's, she is often looked bad upon because she is seen as a threat, as a dangerous person, as someone better not to approach because she reports anything. The co-workers who never witnessed the woman's harassment firsthand seem to see it happening but always fail to act. I never noticed it because the harasser likely acted very privately. Perhaps when I came out of the bathroom, when I was in the kitchen or office area or whatever, but of course, like many co-workers, they didn't see this harassment on their own. They just see him as an annoying person. Let's call it that. Then there's power harassment, which is also called pawahara. Along with sekuhara, pawahara are the two most used, right? Because precisely, pawahara talks about hierarchical abuse in work environments. The good thing is that Japan is currently more sensitive to the issue of harassment. Sometimes, even the slightest behavior can be considered pawahara, and people try to be as kind as possible in work environments to avoid being accused of pawahara, right? But what happens? In companies with many employees, I don't know, an office consisting of 50 people or 100 people. Here it's difficult. People tend to take care of themselves a bit more, because there are many points of view, because there are many people who could be watching. But in small companies of 5 or 10 people, pawahara is more normalized because, of course, it's a small environment. Therefore, quote, familiar, unquote. Yelling at an employee and setting an example of the boss's authority, sometimes they see it as something very common. That's why pawahara is the most common thing in the world, in a way. Sometimes a viral video is leaked on television showing an employee being loudly reprimanded, beaten up, or something like that. A coworker records it and it ends up on the news. And that usually happens more in very small companies, not in well-known large companies. On the other hand, in large, very large companies, I mean, offices of Sony, Mitsubishi, Honda, and similar companies. They are more careful with harassment so that there is no, because they don't want to ruin the brand's reputation. Therefore, there they are like somewhat safer environments in terms of harassment and that kind of things. And rather, it is not forgiven at all. The next one is called Matahara, which comes from maternity harassment. This is very complicated because companies can give certain benefits or permissions to future mothers who are employees of the companies or those who have young children. For example, daycares typically open at 8 o'clock in the morning and close at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. If that is the exact office schedule, the mother will definitely arrive at least an hour late, and she has to leave at least an hour early. And the fact is that it's something that can't be negotiated. It's simple. The woman continues to work. She just needs to leave the child. And that's something ultra understandable. But many coworkers don't like to be understanding about those things. Among themselves, they're going to say, "Look, this colleague always arrives late, leaves early, and gets paid equally, while we have to do her job too." That could lead to some kind of abuse. For instance, avoiding conversation with her, not communicating, and mistreating her. Or tell her, maybe, throw in her face that if they are on the same level, throw in her face that she works less. And that's why many women have it ingrained that if they are going to be pregnant and have children, perhaps the best option is to resign, to leave their career. As I've mentioned, for example, in the problems of the low birth rate in Japan. Why do women there may want to have children, but why in the end do they decide not to have them? The other one is patahara. It sounds very funny, but, well, it comes precisely from paternity harassment, which sometimes is even worse. Obviously, because, let's see, on the mother's side it's much more understandable, but on the father's side, Japan is not very tolerant. It's not open to the father needing permissions for whatever, to help a mother who just gave birth or something like that. Because in Japan, it's very typical that the man, if he takes any time off during the woman's pregnancy, it's basically on the day of the birth. It is extremely normal for him to go to work the very next day. I've seen it even in construction environments, not just in office-related, something super formal. A man who was in charge of a small project on the electrician's side, where I worked, had a son, and the next day he was working. And I asked him, "What are you doing here?" He replied, "I have to work. I'm the one in charge. But if we can do the job on our own, I mean, no." But of course, sometimes many have that chip incorporated, which is something very normal. That the woman has to take care of it herself or that her mother helps her. I don't know, or some friend, I don't know, but once, about 5 years ago, it must have been that someone, a politician for example, had used his permit of his day off for paternity leave. It came out in the news because he was the first politician in history to take days off because the woman gave birth. It was big news. To set an example, it seems correct to me, but to the point that it was in the news seemed very strange to me. But to an average man, they would be like, "No, you have to work. I mean, paternity leave? Did you give birth?" That's how most superiors feel about it. I repeat, in big companies there won't be a problem, but in small companies, they're going to find it very odd and ask you, "When will you be returning to work?" They are not easy in fathers. Or imagine the situation of a single father. It is possible that he has to take his child to school or daycare and pick him up. Will they look down on him? Although they could be a little more empathetic because the child doesn't have a mother. So there's that pro and that con, let's say. Or they can empathize and understand him better. Or they can see him as a fool who wants to take advantage of his situation to work less. The next one is kasuhara, which comes from customer harassment. Many people know that in Japan, the public service is very good. That the customer is treated like a god, like a king, that the customer is always right, etc. And that's why there is customer abuse, where customers abuse employees who must treat them well and are always expected to agree with them. There are many instances of people making unreasonable and unfair claims to those who serve them and take advantage of their situation. It is improbable for this to occur in Japan. However, there can be a serious incident from time to time. Caught in some security camera or on television, I once saw an elderly person slap a girl who was serving him, and that was heavy. Obviously, in those cases, the customer is not right. The police are called, and the guy is arrested. There was an incident. I'm not sure if it's considered harassment, but let's see. A guy grabbed his pubic hair, cut it off, and put it in a burger at a McDonald's. Then he went and complained about it. But of course, he was caught. It was all over the news and went to jail. However, the truth is that this is quite a case. Sometimes funny, ridiculous, but well, there are other cases out there. Then, the next one is morihara, which is moral harassment when people want to be moralistic. For example, this happens both in work environments and at home. At home, it would be psychological violence, but in a work environment, for example, if a coworker spreads rumors about another coworker because they know this person has had many partners, or they dress a certain way because they saw on their social media that they have certain strange hobbies. And of course, what does that cause? That unconsciously ends up creating a kind of conspiracy, so to speak, to make a person look bad. And if there's any complaint to be made to that coworker, it's used as an excuse. Right? What can you tell me if you've been married 5 times? Things like that. When you're already being attacked on the moral side. And the other one is aruhara, which comes from alcohol harassment. Which, of course, Japan, as it is a society where a lot of alcohol is consumed, many people are forced to drink with their bosses. Of course, and people who don't drink much find it harder. Or perhaps, even simply after work they want to go home, or drink alone at home, or not drink alcohol, or whatever. But many bosses invite them, and they can't refuse an invitation from the bosses to go out for drinks. Which, let's see, on top of that, it's like, I realize what kind of bosses are those who spend their time inviting employees to drink all the time. Basically, it's the one who doesn't even know his wife's birthday, because they might be people with families. Look at this, they are sausages shaped like octopuses. But the thing is, he's the typical Japanese man who's married, has children, but doesn't care about being at home with the family. I have known, for example, the biggest stereotypes of Japanese people do not remember their wife's birthday, because people have told me stories like, the other day I came home, we were eating, and my wife with a sour face says to me, "Did you know that today is my birthday?" Yes, of course I remember. And he remained silent. And he was the typical stereotype of a person who drinks alcohol every day, who likes to gamble money on pachinko, and if he does well, he goes out with girls, that he doesn't spend much time with the family. And that's the stereotype of a Japanese person, of course, of a boss, who wants to go out drinking. And what interests him the least is spending time with the family. This one is very strange. This is a croquette.
Breaded Milanese?
Of liver. It's the first time I've seen it. Let's see. It's good. I wouldn't order it again, but it's different. It's good. But you have to keep in mind that alcohol harassment here is very common, and also that people drink and drink. And drink. And of course, it's ultra typical to see drunk office workers in suits in the city at night. Even tourists see it. They are everywhere. And the last one is hara, which is very simple. It's harassment. It means a false accusation of harassment. That is, the accusation of the accusation. A straightforward example is, a boss tells the employee that his job is poorly done and wants him to do it again, and he says it kindly. But the other one says, no, that's pawahara. You're abusing your power. I worked very hard to do this job and now you're… That would be hahara, the false accusation of harassment, of some kind of abuse of power. By the way, for example, I highly recommend you to watch a cartoon that couldn't even be classified as anime, but there's a cartoon on Netflix called Aggressive Retsuko, or also Agretsuko. They are characters from Sanrio, that is, from the creators of Hello Kitty, that is, super cute, super beautiful characters, little animals, but everything. In a work environment, in an office. Let's see, it's a caricatured social critique of what Japanese society would be like within office environments. For example, there is a character who performs hara. I watched it quite a while ago, but let's see. The episodes are very short and they are fascinating because you learn a lot in them. About Japanese society in general, like Japanese stereotypes. Extremely interesting, highly recommended. In your country, how is the issue of harassment in work environments? I'll read your comments. See you next time. Greetings to you, your family, your pet, and your neighbor. Bye. Hara.